Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Thursday, the 21st of August. Ask your prayers today and this weekend for the Henry Budd College for Ministry, HBCM, up at the PAW near Opaskwayak Cree Nation, OCN. They are celebrating their 45th anniversary this weekend, and people will be gathering there and at OCN to celebrate this weekend with presentations and teachings and all kinds of fantastic stuff. So if you're in the area of the PAW in Manitoba this weekend, come on out and check out the festivities. I will be there all weekend. I leave later on this morning today, and I'll be coming back first thing Monday morning. So over the weekend, things will hopefully get published, but might be a bit late depending on access to internet, things like that. I wanted to talk today about something because I was driving yesterday, had to go to Nipo. I was listening to the radio, listening to the American news, just hearing what's going on, the vote in Texas and stuff like that, about redoing the lines for Congress and everything. And it made me think of what happens when we get so frustrated with the people that we're called to look up to, or the people who make decisions for us. And one of those things was the Pope. Getting frustrated that the Pope isn't as inclusive as people might want him to be. And this goes back not just to the current Pope, Pope Leo, but to Pope Francis and to Pope John Paul II and, well, Pope Benedict too. But I never hoped that he would be inclusive because I didn't think he would be. But thinking back to the conversations I've had with people who are Catholic, Roman Catholic, who have been frustrated because the Pope doesn't acknowledge that the popes have struggled to acknowledge women in ministry, or they aren't acknowledging LGBTQ issues and the realities of what it is to be a parent, and why Planned Parenthood in different forms might not be a bad idea, things like that. Over the years, there have been sort of so many different topics and so many conversations. The one that sticks out the most for me is one I had with two nuns. I was a student, and it was in Winnipeg. So I was in my second year of seminary, and I was on the planning committee. I apologize. It wasn't. It was my first year of seminary. I was not on the planning committee yet. I was a member. I was a participant in the Canadian Theological Students Conference in Kingston, Ontario. And there were two women there who were studying at St. Michael's, or one of the Catholic seminaries in the University of Toronto. And they were both nuns. They were both avowed nuns. And they were taking courses, and they had been elected by their group, by their school, to become participants in this conference. So we were all gathered in Kingston. We went out for dinner one night, and it was at a cathedral, or it was a big church anyway, and the ladies of the church had put on a beautiful, beautiful sit-down dinner for us. We were in the basement and sit with white tablecloths that works. And we were sitting, and these two nuns were like drilling me with questions because I was not certain at that time that I wanted to become a priest, but I was in the MDiv, which is the stream of education you would take to become a priest. And I was having this conversation with them about how I felt called and what I knew for sure, what I didn't know for sure. And I asked them about what they were doing. And in the course of the conversation, they expressed that they both felt that they were called to be priests. And yet, within the Roman Catholic Church, of course, they couldn't be priests. They were nuns. And I asked them, why don't you just leave? Like, come over to the Anglican Church. I mean, that does happen. We've even had Anglican priests move over to the Roman Catholic Church. So, and I said to them, why wouldn't you just come over? And they both looked at me like I'd asked the most ridiculous question ever. And their response was, well, we're a Roman Catholic. I'm like, oh, I get that. I understand that. But you're not allowed to fulfill your call within the Catholic Church, so why don't you leave the Catholic Church and become the Anglican? And again, they looked at me like I had two heads. And then they started to explain to me that they believed that God had called them to be priests, but they also believed that God had called them to be Roman Catholic. And so part of their calling, part of their discernment and their work and what they were doing at that conference and what they were doing in seminary was indeed to work toward the goal, to work toward the fact that God was indeed calling them to be priests as women to be priests within the Roman Catholic Church, even though it was like 99.999% certain that in their lifetimes, they were older ladies, that in their lifetimes they would never be allowed to become priests in the Roman Catholic Church. And yet, they said to me, how faithful to our calling would we be if we left behind the path that God had called us to take so that we might take an easier path? Yes, we would be priests. And yes, we do recognize the Anglican Church as a true and valid church and valid priesthood. But it isn't ours. We were called by God to be priests. We were also called by God to be Roman Catholic, which means that we will walk the path toward priesthood within our denomination, even if it means we never get there, but we will never have given up. They were so committed to what they heard, what they understood that God had spoken to them, that they placed their trust in the call God had on their lives to continue moving forward as they were called to do, even though it looked an awful lot like they would never ever achieve their goal. They were willing to trust God that the work they were called to do would in the end by being faithful to God, be worth it, and would have some impact, would have some progress toward what they believed God was calling them to do. Do I believe that God was calling them both to be priests? Absolutely. Do I understand their desire to remain in the Roman Catholic Church when it was almost an absolute certainty that they would never be ordained priests? Actually, I do understand that. Because when we are faithfully following God, it isn't ours to say to God, well, I'm only going to do this if you do what you've promised or what you've called me. You see, the promise to them, God, they weren't claiming that God had promised them that they would become priests. They believed that God had called them, that their true vocation was to be a priest. And that's a big difference. You see, like the world I live in, there are lots of things that I think God is calling me to do as a bishop. Things that I think God is saying, this is what the Diocese of Brandon, the Anglican Church of Canada, the Christian church where you live, this is where you are called to move forward. This is what you are called to do. And I have no doubt that there are many parts of that call that I will fulfill, that I will see happen. But I also have no doubt that God is calling me to do the impossible. That God is calling me to step one foot forward, and continue forward in such a way that even though I will never, ever live to see the end of what I've started or what I have joined in and am participating in, I have to trust that God's will is perfect. And if I listen to God's voice and I follow God's will will be done. Following what God is calling us to do is not a guarantee that we will celebrate the accomplishments that we participate in. And that's a hard thing to acknowledge when you're trying to follow God's will. But we are called to do that work, to walk that path as faithfully as we can, with the assumption that we will. Because how many of us give it 100% if we believe we're never going to see the end outcome? We are more likely to give it all we've got to give, to just keep on punching at it and going and fighting and trying and believing in it if we have some hope that we'll see the end outcome. And see, that's the thing. Hope, faith is something that we can't, it's the belief that something's going to happen that we can't see yet. I have faith that one day those two nuns they'll be in heaven, but they'll be able to look down from heaven and see those women who came after them, who walked in their footsteps, who walked along the path that they started. They will end up at the steps of the sanctuary in a basilica, with hands being laid upon them, with a bishop ordaining them as priests, as women priests within the Roman Catholic Church. It may take another 500 years, who knows? But if the women, those sisters, those nuns had not done the work they were doing faithfully, then those people, those women coming behind them, would have that much more work to do, which would delay everything. It isn't about us necessarily seeing the outcomes. It is absolutely about us being faithful to God's call and doing what God is calling us to do. And I mentioned that I was thinking about this because of the politics in the States and everything, the Democrats and the Republicans and everything. And I think what it comes down to is God's will be done for Canada, for the United States, for all of the places, for all of the people in God's good time. But that is not an excuse that when we don't see God's good time coming, it's not an excuse for people to stop. So for those people who are fighting hard for democracy, for people who are fighting hard to make sure that people have the right to vote and they have the right to have autonomy over their own bodies and their education and their healthcare and all of those things that go with democracy that right now I'm so blessed that we have in Canada. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep fighting, even if you don't see the end of the fight, even if you don't see the outcome that you want to see your children or your children's children will. And as hard as that truth is, like those sisters, if we are being faithful to who we are called to be, if we're being faithful to what we are called to do, it's worth the fight, even if we don't see or hear the bell ding to say we won the round. It's ours to simply say, "Here, yes, Lord, here am I. Send me." Whether it's in the world of democracy or the world of the church or the world of just being faithful and listening to God's call in your life. Yes, Lord, here am I. Send me. Have a great day, everybody. I will see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel. God bless.